All right, Scott, a couple of things. Something I wanted to, you just got back from Russia, but I saw something, and very early in the conflict, one of the things you discussed was very early, one of the first people that talked about it was the political fallout. What, you had said things like, in the long run, I don't see how these governments can maintain, how they can stay in power. Just one thing I wanted to ask you about before we get into Ukraine, and that is there are articles now saying NATO wants to move, open a shop in Tokyo or something, so that now the North Atlantic shores apparently are in China. I don't know what the hell they're figuring that out. But bottom line is, Macron is saying no. Macron is coming out saying, hey, man, that ain't NATO. That ain't what we do. And I have to get the feeling, with all of the pushback that I've heard from particularly the business community, that he's speaking for a bloc. Your thoughts on that, Scott?
I agree totally. I mean, well, the French have long said, and when I say the French, I mean Macron. He's led the charge on this, that he doesn't want to see Europe turn into a battlefield between the United States and China. And that's not his goal. That's not his objective. It's not good for Europe. And in this, he's supported by, I would say, the realists of Europe, people who are affiliated with the industrial blocs, people who understand Chinese economy, and the role the Chinese economy plays in the global economy, and the absolute necessity of maintaining sound economic relations with China for the survival of the European economy, especially in a post-Ukraine conflict world where they have committed suicide from a energy security standpoint. So Macron is backed by this. Now he is facing off against what I'll call the lesser people of Europe, the political elite who owe their positions to their subservience to American policy objectives. And so these are the people that are actively articulating in favor of the expansion of NATO, and they're the ones who are buying into the American objective, because America is looking at China and recognizing that it doesn't have the best base of support in the Pacific. Many nations are looking at China, looking at America, seeing America in retrograde. And so the United States is trying to create the impression that it has far more support than it does. So that's why they're trying to link NATO, a North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to the Pacific, which is not the North Atlantic. And I also think it's a sign of desperation on the part of the United States and NATO. They're seeking relevance. They're seeking something to justify their continued existence. The NATO meeting, I believe next month in Vilnius, is going to be interesting, because the NATO is going to have to start to come face to face with the reality of Ukrainian defeat, which means a NATO defeat, how they react to that. Because rhetoric can only get you so far. At some point in time, rhetoric has to be turned into reality. And the reality of NATO is that while you can doctor the paperwork to make NATO look good on paper, it doesn't look good in reality. It's a very weak organization. The costs that are associated with building NATO up to the level that many of these stooges of America claim it should be is prohibitive. Germany is an economy in recession. How do you transition from a recession economy where the very industrial base you need to build or rebuild a military has been gutted, shut down? They can't afford to produce the steel, the aluminum, the metals necessary for this. So Macron is on to something. I think this is the beginning of a growing movement in Europe to distance themselves from an expansive NATO. I think there is a desire in Europe right now to get down to the business of looking out for what's good for Europe. And what's good for Europe no longer automatically is connected to what's good for America.
Um, I wanted to ask you this before we get, certainly there's dams blown, there's all kinds of things going on. There's plenty to talk about. But before we get into that, I want to ask you about your trip because, I heard nothing but propaganda about Venezuela and South America, what have you. And then I had the opportunity to go to Venezuela, travel around, go out to little towns in the middle of nowhere, talk to the people. And I got a completely different perspective, not only on Venezuela, but on U.S. foreign policy and on the media and all of this kind of stuff, right? So even though I know you've traveled extensively throughout your career and you spent a significant amount of time in the Soviet Union, if you could tell us, was this kind of an eye-opening moment? What did you really learn what did you pick up from your trip to Russia last month?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that while I spent 26 days in Russia, that's not enough.
Right.
Russia is a huge country. It's a very complicated country. So I'm not going to insult anybody, especially the Russian people, and say that I saw everything, I know everything, I'm all seeing, all knowing now, all wise about things Russia. If anything, this trip taught me that I know nothing about Russia, and therefore all these experts that are out there pontificating about Russia, they know nothing too. And that's my lesson to the American audience right here: is Russia is not what you're seeing on TV. Russia is not what you're reading. I was given a unique opportunity to visit 12 cities that encompassed the geographic width and breadth of Russia. My hosts were wonderful people who, when I met with Russians, I met with the highest quality Russians. And what I mean by that is when they wanted to give me an entree into a part of Russian society, I got the best ambassador of that part of Russian society to explain it to me, to be there, to tutor me. And so this was a huge educational opportunity. I can come out with certain takeaways. One, sanctions aren't working. Now, you and I have talked about this because sitting back here, looking at everything that we look at, the data that's coming out, it's just clear that the Russian economy continues to function and that the European economies are struggling. But to see it in person, to get off the airplane in Novosibirsk, which was my first city, the third largest city in Russia, with the fastest growing economy in Russia, and to understand what's behind this economic growth. One, the idea of isolating Russia has failed. Everybody's in Russia. Everybody's in Russia. Everybody's in Russia. Even the people we claim aren't in Russia, they're in Russia because Russia is thriving economically. It's a great place to invest. But the Chinese are in there in a big way. The Indians are there, the Pakistanis are there, and other people are there. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Because it's business, and business is good. But the most important thing about who's in Russia is Russia's in Russia. See, the United States has made a fatal mistake. We've talked about this before, about the role of the oligarchs. How we helped create an oligarch class in the 1990s that was so powerful that even a Vladimir Putin wasn't able to sweep them away. Instead, he had to make accommodations with them that allowed this oligarch class to not only continue to exist, but to thrive. And they were taking trillions of dollars of Russian wealth, and it was fleeing Russia. All those yachts, all the villas, all the investments that were made overseas. That was bad for Russia because the wealth of Russia is being stripped away and sent abroad, and it's not being put back into Russia. But because of sanctions, these oligarchs can't take their money anywhere. It has to stay in Russia, and they have to reinvestment in Russia. Russia is a nation. You know how Joe Biden had wanted to have this Build Back Better plan where we were going to have this $1 trillion infrastructure investment. We're going to build everything and all that, and it never happened because we don't have the money, et cetera. Well, Russia's got the money, and they are building back better. They have taken Joe Biden's concept, and they've turned it into reality. Everywhere you look in Russia, there's new construction. new bridges, new highways, new train stations, new metro stations, new everything. It's all being built. They have city planners now in certain areas who, in the past, like any city, let's take the city of Albany. You read about it every year about the budget. We got our budget. Well, we can't give these people everything they want. We're not going to be able to do this. We have to cut back here to do this, that, and the other thing. And so what happens is you have a lot of people who don't get to do the projects they want to do. Right now, in these cities, you have a budget where they go, how do we spend all this money? How do we spend all this money? They are actually calling people up saying, hey, we got 1 billion rubles we need to do something with. We need you to come in and do this project. And people are like, yeah, but I'm doing another project over here. I mean, this is, American city planners would beg for this kind of activity, and it's all because of the United States. Now, does this mean that the Russian economy is being managed perfectly? No. Like any time when you're flush with money, there's corruption, there's inefficiencies, there's inadequacies, there's just petty human stupidity, where bureaucrat X doesn't like bureaucrat Y, therefore nothing's going to get done. Does this exist in Russia? Hell yes, it does. Is it a problem? You're damn right it's a problem. Russia isn't perfect. Anybody who's listening to this thinking that Ritter's drank the Kool-Aid and he's drunk on Putin. No, I'm not. I'm simply being honest with what I saw. I saw a nation undergoing a construction transformation. I also saw a nation struggling within itself, as any human-based society does. There are problems. It ain't perfect. There are things that can be done to be better. I would tell you this, if Russia actually got its act together in terms of the bureaucracy, the inefficiencies of the bureaucracy, the inherent corruption of a post-oligarch reality, it would be unstoppable. The potential for Russia is so much greater than the reality of Russia. And the reality of Russia is pretty good. Pretty good. They're doing okay. If you think we're going to beat Russia by imposing sanctions, you're wrong. Russia is doing well. The other thing is the level of patriotism. Some people, again, they when I say what I'm about to say, people are like, you're just naive, Scott. A pie in the sky moment, kumbaya, I want to hold hands, sing songs. Wow. But when I say I'm on the search for the Russian soul, that's serious, because the one thing I can take away is that there is a Russian soul. And if you don't understand it, you don't understand Russia. It's real. Now, how do you define it? It may not be able to be defined. That's sort of I'm trying my best. I've collected a lot of data. I'm thinking about it. I'm writing about it. But the conclusion I've reached so far is that you can't define the Russian soul. It's like defining God.